Right, now we're going to start looking at the demand side. And we need to start to get a feel for, really at a high level, which industrial sectors do we think could be interesting in terms of their pioneering or lagging or wherever we think in terms of their adoption of private networks. And if I could invite the panelists to take the seats on the stage for this section, which is Mike, Vikas and Aitor. And yes, please, Mike, if you take a seat here. And then Vikas in the middle. And then, Mike, over to you, if you'd like to start your thoughts or share your thoughts.
So good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you to the Small Cells Forum for inviting me. I'm Chief Scientific Advisor for the Department for International Trade, and in that capacity I deal with lots of areas to do with export and inward investment. But I also bring a history of 30 years in mobile, mainly with Telefonica, and I'm a former chairman of the GSM Association. And as I'm probably one of the older people in the room, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the history of private networks first, and the 4 phases of private networks as I see them. First of all, we couldn't do private networks or even small cells with private networks without the liberalization that occurred in the 1970s or 80s. Some of that liberalization helped to develop alternative solutions for private circuits. If we didn't have those alternative solutions for private circuits, private networks probably would not exist. And the UK happens to be one of the few countries that liberalized early and privatized early to help bring about that competition. And the availability of private circuits has helped the City of London be as strong as it is from a trading point of view internationally, but also links towards international diverse routing of international circuits as well. What we saw in the 80s and 90s was the development of solutions which used to be called call access, or in some terminology, PSTN bypass. So the mobile operators, where I used to work, used to actually offer services to business customers direct to the switchboard through private circuits. Those private circuits opened up the first generation private networks as they were then. That was followed in the 90s and the 2000s by numbering plans, so being able to dial directly to an extension in a company's switchboard, but also starting to help to substitute some of the PMR, private mobile radio systems and paging systems at the time. Again, an extension of private circuits in the 90s and noughties. In the noughties and the 2010s, we saw the arrival of femtocells and now small cells. We saw the arrival of tailored coverage using some of these lower cost options. But we also saw changes to distribution channels with the arrival of MVNOs and different distribution channels specializing in the business sector, not just in consumer sectors. Some of them specialized in M2M, machine to machine, and then more recently we've seen some of them moving towards the Internet of Things. If we come to 2010 and the 2020s, I think some of the lessons from London 2012 are quite important. When we hosted the Olympics here in the UK, in London mainly, but also in Weymouth, it was quite clear that no single operator, including my own, O2, or Vodafone, or EE, were able to service all the requirements during London 2012. So there was quite a lot of coordination to make sure we maximized the capacity of the spectrum we had, but also one operator led with one stadia, another operator led with another venue, another operator led with another venue, and there was really strong coordination. And there will be really strong lessons that lead into the Rugby World Cup that's taking place next year in France in September and October, and indeed the Olympics that are taking place in Paris, July and August 2024. To me, I don't often say this, but taking lessons from the French might be a good idea. However, we might offer them some advice in the private network space or the general experience we had with London 2012. I'd also say we've seen in the last 15 years the growth of Wi-Fi in this area. So it's no longer a question of cellular only for private networks. Wi-Fi plays a major part. Clearly, with the iPhone from 2007, we brought Wi-Fi and cellular together. And frankly, for private networks, we need to consider Wi-Fi in the mix and the roadmap that relates to that. We've also seen the growth of network sharing. Now, that is not the case in all countries. We do not see levels of network sharing that we've had in this country for a number of years around the world. So I think there are lots of lessons from network sharing that have led towards the neutral host type concepts that we love and know today. In terms of the early markets for most countries tends to be the headquarters of corporate businesses. They tend to be stadia or venues, of which lots was mentioned yesterday. Transport nodes such as railway stations, airports, ports. Transport nodes are very important, particularly for capacity, same as with stadia. The capacity challenge for one operator is really high, so sharing within stadia venues and transport nodes is particularly important. We've also seen a lot of examples of shopping malls as an early market, where big shopping malls can't cope with just one operator. Another early market we've seen is universities and science parks. We've also seen a lot of the energy suppliers who moved from PMR to cellular, who wanted other things from a private network or tailored network point of view. The next phase of the markets, which I think have been talked about, include things like manufacturing sites, particularly for productivity, but also hospitals. You know, if you think about where are the private networks in hospitals, there aren't many today around the world, but actually it's a growth area. Some cities don't really have enough capacity with one operator alone, so there's a lot of scope for private networks in cities, sometimes labeled smart cities, but there needs to be a leader, a clear lead customer in that area. Construction is probably another gap, and also agriculture is another gap. But if we come back to demand, what are the 5 drivers of demand that I've seen for the last 30 years? They haven't really changed. Number 1 is cost reduction, not just usage cost reduction, but total cost of ownership reduction. That depends very heavily on scale and standards. It does not depend just on new spectrum. It depends very heavily on scale and standards. And many of the businesses that move towards private services from the mobile operators relied on that cost reduction as being a key driver. Secondly, capacity, and I've referred to capacity in the context of stadia and transport nodes and the Olympics. So if we don't think about multi-network arrangements, we may not have the capacity because of spectrum constraints or investment constraints. A more recent driver in recent years has been security. And as companies get to use and transfer a lot more in the way of data, they want more control over the security of the data and how it moves from different machines or different people, how it moves around a business. That security driver is getting ever stronger in private networks. And that particularly brings in a lot of systems integrators who have knowledge of a given sector or a given business, particularly if they can help improve the security. If we think about data and productivity, we can see businesses who want to change the way they work, the way they distribute their products, the way they sell their products. So that transfer of data is not just internal, it's also with their sales channels and with their employees all around the world. And that includes the Internet of Things, that includes other means of transformation of their business. But I think the last one, and this will remain a key demand driver, if a business of any location wants to transform its service, it has to think about data and connectivity together. And that's why I think transformation is one of the biggest drivers of demand today, in addition to cost reduction, capacity, security, and data and productivity. Technology is a key enabler for all of this. Spectrum is also a key enabler, but I think it should be led by demand. I think the need for stronger systems integrators around the world is getting even stronger. I think we need to make sure, with an eye on demand, we support that. So from a trade point of view, we will highlight some of the skills we have in the UK and hopefully find ways of collaborating and maybe exporting some of those services in due course. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Mike. Under time pressure, see if we can keep to 5 minutes or so. Vikas, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for listening. They say that the dessert has to be taken in the last. So I hope this session is like a dessert of what we were doing from last 2 days. Here I am filling up the big shoes of Ravi and Prabhakar, who are leading this emerging technological group, ETG, within the Small Cell Forum. So in the Small Cell Forum, we worked on the component level, the reference design. We have heard the session on that, on the FAPI and FAPI, and other things. Apart from that, this blueprint activities has been started some time back to bring all the things together to make a solution, end-to-end solutions. So the way we make a blueprint for any residential building or or any other things before we do. So there is a need to do the blueprints for the private. This group will work upon the different blueprints. So we have the first use case that the group has picked up is related to the private network blueprint. So I will go to a little bit details about it. Okay, so as I mentioned that in the small cell forum we worked upon at the component level, product level, and also the deployers where the hosted OpenRAN has done a lot of work and they come up with some of the recommendations and other things. We have listened about the markets and other things. But this activity is like how to group them, all of them together to make end-to-end solutions, having different ecosystem vendors to collaborate together to make a system which can be deployable in a particular setup. Okay, as we know that the FAPI spec for the 5G is released in June 2021, last year. And after that, there is one more version in the November, and then the third version is almost there. So you will hear it about it. And then apart from that, we also worked upon the different other things, like the reference design for the small cells. So this blueprint activity is taking all those components into the picture and then making a system out of that. So here, not only building a system, but how do we do the testing? As we heard that one of the problem is doing the integration together and then finding out, iron out the issues when we combine the solution together. So this activity will take care of the many works and the many streams into the picture to make a complete solution. That includes the component vendor, infrastructure vendors, automation vendors, system integrator, test solution vendor, OEM, and then top of the MNO, which will ultimately deploy the solution, which looks to be like proven in some scenarios, so that can be repeated again in the other scenarios. So as an operator, they have a confidence that, okay, they can take the system and then deploy it in the similar kind of the environment. Okay, this scope of the private network has like 3 different components. So we did studies, so there are other blueprints available in the industry today, but none of them has have the small cell as a center. So this blueprint activity is put the small cell as a center and then builds a blueprint on top of it. Okay, I have to skip some of the slides.
But I think the slides will be available to the attendees after, so it will be a very useful pack for people to see.
Yeah.
To summarize what we're doing.
Sure. I think this is coming from the market survey that we are expecting some 3 million number of RUs to be available by 2026. But the shortcoming is there that the barrier is there that how you make a system altogether. So that like 30% of the deployer says that they will roll out more and more quickly if more and more plug and play deployment were enabled. And this activity is exactly doing that. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are other blueprints as well, but none of them have the small cells into the focus. So this activity is trying to fill up that gap. So we have picked up like 4 different blueprints: private network in the standalone mode, private network with MNO, CB2X, and also the industrial. So one by one, all the specs will come. And what kind of a spec you can see, I will cover in the future slides. So this is a particular diagram which says that what are the different components which will sit on the edge and which will go into the public. And then we have the RUs, which have all the 3 kind of the small cells, like all-in-one, split 0, split 2, and also a small cell forum split 6 interface. And that will connect to the on-prem private edge network, so which is closer to the RUs. And then there is a public clouds where end-to-end service management, enterprise cloud-based applications, and hyper edge framework. So that kind of distributions are there within the functions and in the solutions. Okay, so this, I will come to this slide. So here we talk about the 2 different approaches. One is where the frequency spectrum is licensed, and another one is in the unlicensed approach. That what kind of people or the companies that we need to make this blueprint from the paper to the reality. So there is a need to work all together, like platform provider, like the infrastructure provider, network function provider, orchestration, and system integrator. So this has to work all together to make this blueprint into the reality. And that is the beauty of this blueprint, that we are not talking about at the component level or the interface level. We are talking at the solution level, which can be deployable, proven, tested, and then it can be taken to the network.
Can you finish?
Yep, I will try to. Yeah. A couple of slides.
So the slides will be available to, I think,
yeah.
to find out.
Yeah, so I think at the moment, we already have 19 weeks we have spent on this work item. And all the basic building blocks are in place. So this is going to be coming out soon from the small cell forum. So we are expecting that the first version will come out very soon, which will have the essay version of the network blueprint, and then we will take it further. Okay, this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vikas. Excellent. There's some good work going on there. Now, I'm not sure whether that's private networks for dummies. That looks fairly complex, but so we need to think about the accessibility of that. But I think that's great. There's a lot of technical work there in detail and analysis that's gone on. So our final presenter in this session, Aitor from Cellnex.
Thank you very much. Hello, very nice to be here with you, with the ones that are heavy and stay till the last session. Let me introduce myself. I'm Aitor Rubio. I'm the head of products and solutions for private networks in Cellnex Telecom. Let me highlight something, because probably you all know Cellnex because of our neutral host capabilities and all the shared infrastructure and tower co-business that we run together mainly with the operators, with the MNOs. But it's important to highlight that we are running another line of business which is devoted specifically to private networks. So we deliver the full solution, the radio, the core, the devices, the service, the operation, maintenance, everything for our enterprise customers that really want an outstanding service that is not based on the private coverage, on the MNO's network. There are customers that are simply requesting something different. It's not public coverage is good or bad, it's simply they are demanding something else, that they want to have full control of their solution, they want to have full reliability and want to have clear knowledge about the status of their network at any moment. So once said this, I've included, for sake of this topic today, some information that is public, is available from Analysis Mason. They were even yesterday presenting some of their data and their information. This is real implementations. I'm not talking about the future. I'm not talking about whatever we plan to have, but this is actual implementations. These are the number of networks you can see in the left-hand side, actual implementations based on 4G and 5G for private networks, and the main sectors they are running for each of them. You can see there is clear difference on which sectors are the ones that are definitely leading here. And also, there is a forecast for the next 3 years, 3-4 years, about how these segments will be still leading, in this case, worldwide. The other one is just for Europe. This one is worldwide. Which sectors will be leading? I think there's no surprise here. What happens with the introduction of 5G, of Open RAN, of new technologies in general? There are a number of topics to be discussed or to be covered. These are features that customers are demanding. They are based on basically the key features of 5G that we all are aware of. So I don't need to spend so much time here about the enhanced broadband, reliability, and so on. But I want to highlight there are a number of elements that we need to deliver together with these capabilities provided by the vendors that are doing great effort in this new evolution of the technology. We need to help reshaping this market. We need to help in the implementation of this new technology. So it's not only these new technologies providing new features, we need to help our customers on implementing and delivering these solutions. We have been also talking during these 2 days about the use cases. They are definitely the triggers for these new technologies. They are the need that justifies the communication networks that are underlying. Is something that even from some of our colleagues was highlighted before. The communications technology itself is not what the enterprise customers are demanding. They are demanding for something to solve the issues they do have. The communications technology that is underlying is something that they understand they need, but they don't want to take care about if this is Wi-Fi or if it is 5G or if it is whatever. They want to solve the issue they do have. They have a pain point, they have processes to be optimized, new revenues that want to come to their companies. So, just as an example, we have deployed more than 40 private networks across Europe right now. These are examples of the customers that we've been working with. As you see, more or less it's in line with the segments that we've been presenting in the initial slide of the Analysis Mason report. It's important for all of them to know this. The communications technology is important, definitely, but if 4G is enough for me, and I have better devices availability, and I have lower price for my use cases, then it's fine. 5G is very good if I have more demanding requirements that are not sufficient with 4G to be covered. In that case, yes, definitely. There are a number of customers here that are requesting for 5G for this reason. But there are also some customers that simply are demanding 5G because of the market. They listen about 5G and they want to have 5G because it's famous, it's in the news, everybody's talking about it. So, important highlight here. Demand of private networks is increasing. Market is not mature enough yet, although it's increasing very quickly. There are many customers that are demanding this kind of new connectivity solutions more and more often, but they want to solve their issues. So it's not enough just providing the connectivity technologies. It's a handicap for companies like us that we work in the telco market. We are not used to be the ones providing the IT workloads, the applications and the services, but we cannot leave those customers alone. Some of them, they know which applications they know. But even in that case, they don't know how to integrate those services and those applications with the communications technology. We need to help them. At least some kind of IT integration is always needed. Whenever we are delivering a private network, it's not just simply to communicate a couple of devices among them. This is not really solving any customer issue or any customer pain point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, I'm conscious that people will want to get on trains and things. So what I'm going to do is just do a short panel here, and then I'm going to ask the last two speakers to join me on stage, and we'll do a panel with everyone to sort of wrap up the session. So stand by, Mo, and you can see you on your phone, and also Bjorn. Are you still here still? Yeah, so not yet, but after we, and Andrew, if Andrew's around. I can't see Andrew. Great. Okay, so stand by. I'm going to just do 5 minutes, and then I'll ask you to come on stage, and we'll bring everyone together for the last discussion. Okay, so really just to explore that point, I just wanted to dwell on the Cellnex point about the complexity, and also commenting on Vikas's lots of nice diagrams that show various components coming together. How do we, so do you call yourself Cellnex a system integrator, or have you got system integrator partners in each market, or how are you looking at that? The question we were discussing earlier,
yes.
Localization.
Yes.
So do you prefer to partner with people local to the markets, although you're a large European player?
Let me start from the beginning. 1 year and a half ago, we acquired one specialized company. Yep. On the Nordics. It's called Edscom. The logo was at the beginning of my presentation together with the one from Cellnex. This company has helped us quite a lot understanding how to deal with these customers that are interested in private networks and the type of solutions they want. As they were basically starting as a startup, they have indeed these system integrator capabilities in-house. Right. They have developed these capabilities, so we not only acquired the company and whatever tools and services they do have, but also the skills and the capabilities in order to be transferred, at least partially, to all of our teams across Europe. But it's also true that it's important to count on local companies that can help us on the delivery, on part of this integration. It's complex because whenever we are mixing two different sectors, the telco one plus whatever is the customer working for, there is always a mismatch that we need to help to align. We need to specialize and we need to focus on certain segments in order to provide the most of the value that we can add, not only just giving the tool and saying, hey guys, you work alone from now.
Yeah, but I guess you need to be, because in the forum we think about the merits of having a template, so what we're thinking about or wondering about is how specific to make the template for each sector. Is it sufficient to have a private network view that talks about a generic template for the whole, for each of the sectors? Or probably, I think we need to start thinking about, there's a transport sector and that will take a subset, or it may have additional templates or blueprints that are needed. It feels like that may be needed to help ground out some
Yes,
of the...
it depends very much on the value proposal that you are offering to the customer. If you are offering something quick and cheap, then standard template works for everyone, and for some customers may work because they are not so much specialized and they just simply work some connectivity layer on the bottom side, and then they will create whatever they need on top of it. But there are some other customers, we are delivering solutions for nuclear power plants.
Yeah, that's
definitely
very special.
We cannot deliver something out of the box just for them. We need to customize and we need to tailor the solutions for these type of customers.
Yeah. Mike, on that list, you saw that from the Mason analysis, the sectors, there was entertainment, but they didn't really pick out on the stadium one that you mentioned. Maybe it's included as an element there within the stadium, but for me, stadium feel like an interesting environment for private and public network converged solutions. I
think the reason it wasn't in the Analysis Mason research is a lot of it has been done with 2G and 3G in mind, and it's migrating towards 4G and 5G.
Yeah.
So they may not count existing 2G and 3G stadia within that analysis.
Yeah.
What I would say to your earlier question to Aitor is, from a small cells forum point of view, I think you should be following how do you scale up in this area.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can do every sector. I think you should follow the ones which will help scale up
so I think
the small cells. I'd also suggest to you that just putting the emphasis on private networks is not enough. I think from your presentation, to me it's about private networks solutions, where things like provisioning, customer care, maybe sector knowledge comes in. If you just talk about the network, we can put the pieces together with some help. But I think there are some issues that go beyond the network that need some attention as well. Yes. That's why the systems integrators often come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point. So, Vikas, we've got some thinking to do in terms of how to move refine the blueprints. But,
it's all great input, and that's why we are here to take the inputs and refine this work item to take more actions and make it like complete solution. So you've proven at one place, so you don't have to prove it at every other places. Yep. And then from the operator point of view, they have a confidence that, okay, something is working in, let's say, Finland, so this can also work in UK and maybe in India or somewhere else. Yep. So that gives the confidence, and the sharing of the knowledge and what they have gone through and what are the shortcomings. This will make, like, we need to all work together to make this happen.
So what's just before we get the other speakers on the stage, I mean, the situation with Jio and in the Indian market, is there a growing interest in private networks, or is that something that's not really taking hold yet as a segment?
From Jio point of view, I think this is, we have the biggest network and the customer base. But there are still areas where there is a struggle to get into it. As the world is moving, like airports or conference or like this and things like that, where you cannot have every operator to build the solutions. So, of course, in the future, there will be a marketplace in India as well.
So it seems like an ideal opportunity for templates and thought processes in Europe, and then some collaboration into India. Ideal. Mike?
I'd love to know how many of the big cricket stadia in India have neutral host solutions, and if not now, why not? Because you won't have the capacity to serve all the fans in those stadia with one network alone.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Okay, I'm going to give the AV guys a bit of a headache now, because I'm assuming you're mic'd up, aren't you, Mo? So could Andrew, Mo, and Bjorn join us on stage, and we'll just take the discussion forward into the next section, where I'm going to start to actually get some more ideas on the stage, because we're not going to conclude the discussions here today. That would be much too ambitious. But first of all, Andrew, if you'd like, because you're new to the stage, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give us your perspective on private networks.
Sure, will do, Simon. My name's Andy King, and I head up private networks for Wireless Infrastructure Group, or WIG, as we're more commonly known. I think, first of all, just say thank you to you, Simon, because it's been a great session that you pulled together this afternoon. I think the idea that this is now going to move forward and be part of the Small Cells Forum is incredibly important. We've heard a lot of recurring themes, and anybody who did PowerPoint training back in the sort of late 80s and early 90s would have heard the old adage of tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And that's the way to get the message across. I think if I just very quickly pick up on one real-world opportunity that really consolidates everything that's been said in the last set of panel sessions. Logistics, supply chain over the last 2 years has become broken. It's really been stressed. We've seen lots of issues with supply chain. One of the areas where that's been very problematic has been the US. And in the US, Utah, which is almost in the center of the US, is a hub for distribution. And Salt Lake City in Utah handles around about 40% of all of the freight traffic that travels from the West Coast. Now, the problem is 90% of that traffic, that freight, arrives on single container lorries for distribution, which is incredibly un-eco-friendly. 30% of those shipments are still dealt with manual bills of lading. These are pieces of paper with carbon paper in between them written out, and they're trying to deal with that. There's no proper automation. There's been a lag with the adoption of technology. So, Utah Inland Port Authority had a great idea that, in fact, if they combined AI got all the systems together, made everything work a lot better, it would make the process a lot slicker. So they needed a new approach to the business, and that would help the supply chain, but it would also deal with the environmental issue. Now, they were quite smart, because what they didn't do was they didn't do what a lot of organisations do, which is think about the sexy application first. They thought, we've got a pile of data black holes, we don't have the connectivity, we can't bring all these things together, what we need is some kind of networking. They decided that private network was the right way to go, and they started to look at how they could implement that. What they found was they could implement a private network, but it was going to have to be 4G in CBRS spectrum. They would have liked to have done 5G, but the devices weren't available. So, okay, that was one thing. They then looked at the various elements of the ecosystem they had to pull together, and they spoke to logistics and supply chain specialists, they spoke to all of the freight companies, they spoke to edge computing specialists, and they got together an ecosystem of people who were involved in this sort of complex distribution network. But they were faced with a challenge that it was very hard to get these people to talk together and to work together. And they then were left with this challenge that, yep, they were going to have a network and they were going to eventually get these people together. Now, so what they did, which was quite clever, they said, let's start small. So they started a development where they deployed a private network, and they've got one specialist logistics operator together with Intel and together with Amazon Web Services, and they've started to get the applications together, and they're delivering the connectivity over a private network. They're going to build that out over 25 square miles, and eventually they're going to take it out across the whole state. But the purpose of recounting that is really picking up on these points that actually we can do things today, but for them to be the best they could possibly be, we do need 5G devices to be available. We need there to be a lot more collaboration. We need there to be specialist system integrators who are all going to work together to pull these elements together. But what we can see from something that will eventually end up as a statewide rollout, that the opportunity is huge. And that's what we should be delighted about in this room, that there is something great for us all to work towards. There's real business there that we can all thrive off. But again, we're going to have to build the templates, and we're going to have to look at the way in which we bring all of these complex elements together to be able to deliver on that. And that's what I think has been great about today, and hopefully we'll just get a few questions around that.
Yeah, and that's fantastic, because the let's start small thing, do what you can do to get something going, start getting people using it and talking about it, actually is just what Anne was saying yesterday in the Liverpool. Yep. So
yeah,
you've got to build something that's a sensible scale, so you can connect to enough people, and then you need to stack some use cases on it. And you can't do paralysis by analysis to build the total business case
what it's done is
or everything for what the ultimate vision, because you'll never build anything.
No. And it's begun to fix the real world problems,
yep.
and that's great,
Yep.
which is, they're moving forward.
So it's almost a build it and they will come attitude to it. But you've got to do a lot of work to build the ecosystem on as the connectivity's there and the devices come.
Yeah. Now, I can't remember how many people, are covered in the sector, but I know Utah itself, I think it's somewhere in the region of 40,000 people who are dependent on jobs in the logistics sector. So again, from a statewide perspective, it's very important for them from employment and well-being.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of us here who sit on the advisory group for the UK 5G and oversee, look over at the exciting testbed activity and think there's some assets here that we can pull. They're the start small things. Now, they may have to be lifted and shifted in some way to another location, because perhaps the sustainability piece in that exact location isn't quite right, but it starts to create a template, starts to create a narrative. So Mo, maybe you could just introduce yourself and your perspective on the trials and test beds and international view, because hopefully you will agree with me that we're doing some useful thought leadership in the trials and test beds work.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and for those who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, Mohammed Larry, or Mo in short, and I'm with the UK's 5G test beds and trials program. I've got a fairly niche role in that I look at both what other government departments are doing and stimulating investment in some of the research development activities from a non-terrestrial network side of things, as well as quantum research, but also what other countries are doing. and where they see sort of demand propagating in terms of not just for 5G, but also potentially for private networks. Not to dilute sort of the demand conversation, but where private networks and perhaps small cells play a great role is in that sort of mobility environment. It's where transport, logistics, manufacturing convene. And where I'm seeing from perhaps a wider digital culture, media, sport sort of environment is the growth in the creative industries, particularly around e-gaming. The industry globally is now worth $1 billion, or just over $1 billion. And that growth is translating into consumer demand. Individuals and businesses wanting more augmented virtual reality on the go. And they don't want the consoles that go with it. They want lightweight materials, perhaps in the form of headsets, perhaps in the form of other sort of UE sort of outlets. But they want that on the go in ways that can deliver both an entertainment value, but also a productivity value. And that growth model requires, perhaps in Mike's comments, connectivity in a Stadia environment or in a more public environment, like in a dense city center.
So you're adding e-gaming into the sector. I mean, exactly how we describe that as an industrial sector or an entertainment sector. But that you think is a platform for driving innovation in the UK.
I'm certainly seeing
a private network usage of that because it's quite localized, high capacity, and importantly, low latency. So it starts to push that dimension potentially in the e-gaming space.
I'm seeing that demand percolate in East Asia and markets in Japan and South Korea in particular. I would add Singapore to that as well.
Okay, yeah.
I would also agree with the other panelists as well as the sessions previously to this, where there is demand in the transportation sector, where there is demand in health and social care and agriculture. But of course, I don't want to duplicate what others have already said.
Well, no, I think that because you participated in the roundtable discussions before this workshop. So, I mean, I think for me, the one that it's been on the slides, but I haven't really clocked it because I think we've been focused in on some of the ones that are manufacturing, sort of classic private network. But the agriculture one is interesting because, you know, that's an area the Small Cell Forum a number of years ago talked about what we call meadow cells at the time. I wasn't really involved in the forum at that time, but I remember seeing Simon Saunders put up some slides on the meadow cell concept connecting to satellites. To help with remote, rural related. And at the time, it was about connecting remote properties, principally was the discussion, but actually, and FWA-like discussions. But actually, you know, these agricultural use cases could well be quite an interesting area for driving, because there's connected vehicles, heavy construction, or heavy plant vehicles, tractors, whatever, harvesters, etc. So it's an interesting area. Bjorn, do you see that for Europe as a sector, the agricultural sector as a
we have
something
been involved in a couple of cases. The problem with those is typically, I mean, they're quite big. So you get into that aspect of
which spectrum?
Which spectrum, is there an operator there or not, is there coverage there or not, so I think that's why they are probably a little bit more further ahead, even though the need from a customer perspective is definitely, we were involved with, I mean, I'm from Sweden, so we have a big forest sort of industry. For them, they would really need connectivity to track certain things,
and from your view, is that maybe still a hybrid or a mobile operator-driven private, principally target, or?
Because that's where you probably benefit from having the bigger radios and the better coverage, right? So I would think being in a small cell event, that's probably not the first one, whereas manufacturing or a port or those more geographically sort of clearly defined areas are easier, lower hanging fruit type of.
Yeah, okay. I'm warming to it simply because of the narrative around connecting to satellites, which I quite like, and architecturally, and given the trends that are happening. But maybe I need to revisit the drawing board in terms of the application area. But in terms of the connectivity piece, I'm interested in the scenario.
Yes.
That's me being an architect. But Mike, what's your view on the agriculture section? Do you think that's still probably, you know, partnering with operators is the best route on that one, or?
Well, I think I told you that I was in Canada 2 weeks ago with Mo, and we were shocked to hear that 80% of Canada has no connectivity. 80% of the landmass of Canada. Right. And therefore they talk about the language of large cells or satellites. Yeah. And how do the language of large cells work with small cells becomes the real issue. They're looking at satellite more readily now. There are more satellites above northern Canada, but also as a hybrid solution with cellular. I think then when we look at the agricultural market, it's actually quite a diverse market. It's not a single market. Yeah. So we can see, for example, intense farming in some areas, which are a bit like manufacturing from a small cells point of view. You can see a need for intensive connectivity, both low latency and high bandwidth, for those vertical farms or intensive farms, a bit like a manufacturing site. Yeah. Then the vast rural areas, I think, are strong candidates for shared rural networks. I think there are tailored solutions within that agricultural mix, but it's a highly complex market, and it wouldn't be somewhere I would start, really.
Right, okay, you're thinking that's not a high priority. Okay, so that's fair enough. So you mentioned mining, the Cellnex. Actually, it was a picture of a tower in an oil rig out in the middle of the sea. And that's always been a nice environment for small cells, because one small cell can cover that and the peripheral water.
When you say nice environment, yes, noise is one of the type of segments, type of customers that we are addressing. We've been commenting about different sectors, and you've mentioned, for example, agriculture just a moment ago. What we try to differentiate is the criticality of the use cases. Right. And the services and the applications that the customers are demanding. So definitely there are different levels. Even one single customer may have different levels of requirements. In agriculture, typically customers are interested purely on connectivity. They need to connect themselves, to connect maybe some IoT devices on rural areas. In that kind of a scenario, we as Cellnex even collaborate together with the MNOs, because we see there a need basically for public coverage extension. We were running a project like this during last year together with the MNOs in Spain. We presented together with them a sustainability report, and definitely something of everybody's interest for these kind of areas. These other environments for specific industries, oil and gas, mining, all these critical environments, their needs are different. They don't need just public coverage extension. They need to ensure that the communications they do have support very strict SLAs. Yeah, that they are able to deploy small cells, that they are able to cover every single centimeter. In mining environments, whenever there is a worker that has not communicated their position with strong accuracy in a time frame of 5 minutes, forces all the mining activity to stop until they find this person. There's no option to lose coverage for that single worker, wherever he is, because they need to stop. It's purely a question of safety, of human life savings. So they need to stop, and when a pit mine, typically open pit mines that are our main customers, they need to stop for even 1 hour or 2 hours, depending on the size of the mine. It's a huge amount of money that they are losing every single hour. So they simply cannot afford to have this loss of coverage for 5 minutes for one single worker.
And that's actually, I mean, you've presented it very clearly in terms, and I can now see the segment, the need segment, that actually is quite interesting in terms of overlaying. Are you talking about pure play connectivity? And there may not be so many fancy applications, but you really need to be solid on the connectivity proposition.
Yes.
And that's for some sectors priority one. And then the other ones, we're talking more ecosystem play, a huge number of stacking of use cases and varied users of the network. And they're actually quite different in terms of how you put them together, I expect, commercially. And that narrative around starting small and building the ecosystem. So these different private networks, they start to you can start to segment them in terms of
Yes,
the approach to the solution discussion.
Absolutely. There are a number of services and applications that might be common for all of them. Then the more you specialize the sector, the more you specialize the applications, the less you can share this knowledge among verticals. Group communications is something that almost everybody wants, almost everybody needs. Tracking and localization is quite common for people, for goods, for objects in a port. You need to, we got this example before, in a port you need to track the containers, which is something that is 200 tons. In a hospital you need to track maybe some goods or some items that are maybe 10 kilos or something like this, but you still need to track them because are critical for saving human lives also. But beyond those services and applications, you can find just a handful of them that are common for all the sectors. Beyond that, you need to specialize.
I see Mo and Mike's put his hand up, so I'll go to Mike first. And Mo.
I just think, when I think about mining, I think about the transition from fossil fuels to renewables. And I'm not sure this conference over yesterday and today has talked enough about energy and the environment and how small cells, private network solutions can actually help to reduce the energy consumption, to help with the transition from fossil fuels to non-fossil fuels, to help with the management of the energy security that is necessary for a business environment. To me, the connectivity story has to talk about addressing energy and environmental issues more fully, and that may cover several sectors. It's not just serving the energy industry, but it's serving the energy environmental issues on the planet. COP26 we hosted in the UK last year. COP27 will be in Egypt this year. There's lots of interest in this area to do with not just oil and gas and renewables, but reducing the energy bill with cost of living.
Music to your ears, Bjorn.
I think so.
That's right, you're just on with that one. Mo, you had a comment.
I was actually going to make a similar point in that what we're learning from the investments we've made together with a lot of colleagues here and partners here is that one use case or one industry isn't going to build the commercial case for investment. It's a combination of industrial sectors coming together to create that demand to then get the investment forward. So when we're talking about connectivity and perhaps more rural, remote locations, agri-tech can play a large role, but so can energy and utilities. So can sort of large manufacturing and distribution centers in those very remote communities. So when you combine some of those use cases, can you actually build a business model so for a vendor to sort of create that sort of business model to put within their own organization, within their own board, to say this is of interest for us to design products for an operator or perhaps some of the emerging operators to service that demand. It's the same conversation. Can we collate some of the use cases and the demand vectors to ensure that there is sustainability rather than just one-off agreements and deployments?
And that's, I think, some of the initiative in the UK around the places discussion is actually important because you need then the intelligence or the cognizance of what are the industries in this place that could start to play on that and looking at adjacent industries and different needs. Absolutely an important area. Andrew, you had some comment. Maybe the discussion's moved on, but you were certainly jumping.
No, I was just going to add to Mike's point that there's this issue around sort of the environmental agenda, which is commenting back on Utah, on this business about them having a single container on a truck. Now, the only reason that they've done that for years is because the only way they can be incredibly flexible is knowing that they've got all of these things on individual trucks which all move independently, rather than just sticking a couple of hundred of them on a train and running it down that. And their objective is to get to this idea that everything will transit from the West Coast ports through Salt Lake City and around the US, primarily by train, which will considerably reduce the carbon footprint. But another particular sector in the UK that we're seeing where there's an environmental impact is commercial real estate. And a lot of commercial real estate owners are looking at deploying, in a fairly small way, private networks within buildings to bring together all of the networking requirements for various disparate systems that are managing lighting, heating, airflow, and things like that in the building, and then attaching that to some AI that will provide the feedback loop that then optimizes that. And the driver for that is one, they will all have made commitments about, when they need to get to, net zero. But the other thing is it actually impacts the value of their assets, because having a good BREEAM rating and being able to demonstrate that sustainability actually increases the value of their asset portfolio. And that's a huge driver for them. Small implementations of private networks in that case, but a very critical one.
That's interesting. So that's actually something you're seeing a demand for that growing now. Yeah?
Absolutely, yes.
And also green investment funds chasing those opportunities. So there is investment money available. It's also good from a landlord-tenant point of view to attract.
The whole thing, you've created a better environment, you've got better PR, you know, everything comes together.
Okay, so I mean, I've got 2 hints now for next year's conference content, but I need to work on the energy and environment related narrative, and we've got the private networks already, so we'll start building out the agenda for next year. That's great. Thank you very much. You're doing my job for me. Is there any other sectors that we haven't mentioned? You think we did a brainstorm on this in the round tables earlier, but have we got a blind spot for a sector that could surprise us as maybe a late bloomer, something that we haven't seen yet that could suddenly grow? I'm wondering whether it's during the recovery of COVID and things are changing in terms of the way people do stuff, whether there's something that may start to become more apparent. But I can't think of it myself. So I'm just asking the crowd, for the wisdom of the crowd.
I don't think we've missed it, because we have mentioned it and Mike's picked it up here, but the stadium opportunity is a very big one, because there's an opportunity for the public network coverage, DAS, because everybody who's gone back wants the same experience in watching sport now or watching events that they had at home. But from a private network perspective, the demand's being placed on those stadia now to deliver better at-seat catering, to be able to sell communication services to the media who are coming on site, who are wanting to deliver then, you know, a better experience back to the viewers at home. All of that kind of thing is also driving a need for both public and private hybrid networks.
Yes, definitely. I think it would be remiss of the UK not to have a view on stadium. I think it's. I mean, I was at a concert on Saturday. Actually, I won't say which stadium it was, but I got a message from my operator saying your data has been turned off after being sat in the stadium for 30 minutes trying to send a message. No. So, you know, on WhatsApp, just a picture. My son, who was sitting next to me, he was on another operator's network, and he got the same message. So nobody could use their data in that stadium on 2 operators. Because, you know, it's just overloaded. It's an overload. You know, it's an overload, and at the end of the day, maybe you could say it's a good thing, because we should have been looking at a stage anyway. But it was before, you know, the acts were on the stage. Yeah. So yes, definitely, it's something that is well worth looking at. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you back 5 minutes of your time, everyone, because I've got a train to catch. So I don't want to be hanging around for too long. But I'd like everyone who remains to thank our panelists for a very interesting and interactive session. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll finish there. Thank you, gentlemen. Right, and with that, we close the conference. Thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you next year.